as many of you know, the Manchester's Planning Commission has been holding a series of hearings, basically running for the past 2.5 years almost, on a plan to overhaul zoning districts and regulations in Manchester. Been a lot of hearings, a lot of discussion about it, and we're here today to talk with three of the folks who've been deeply involved in that whole process. Janet Hurley, the Planning Director for Manchester. Greg Beauchart is the Chairman of the Planning Commission, and Todd Nebraska is a member of the Planning Commission. So, folks, a lot of changes are going to be coming to the zoning regulations if the proposal that you folks have been working on for the past 2.5 or so years eventually passes. And we're not there yet. There'll be more opportunity for people to weigh in on a public hearing in January, I believe, and then the Select Board has to adopt them. But as it stands right now, walk us through some of these changes. We're here in front of the Hampton Inn. What is allowable now here, and what would change if your proposals, more or less as written at the moment in draft form, were to eventually be adopted?
Well, currently we're standing in what will be the town center district, and the intent for the changes here in the town center district is to increase the residential density in the town center. And the goal there, based on comments received in public forums and through the NED study, is to have more people living downtown. So by increasing residential density here, the hope is that it will make it more appealing for developers to create multifamily residential buildings in the downtown. And that's basically an economy of scale issue. If you are able to build a taller building, which we're increasing the height restrictions by 5 feet, you'll be able to get more units and thus bring the cost of unit down to make it more affordable, not only for someone to purchase, but also for a developer to create that space. Another thing we're trying to do is incorporate mixed use into all of those, so you won't just have residential building, you won't just have commercial, you'll have perhaps offices, maybe some retail space, but trying to kind of mix things together and have a multi-use building. And that helps to diversify the people using the buildings and all the people surrounding the kind of microclimate that you have around a building.
So is this designed to encourage new construction or conversion of existing stock into, let's say, apartments or residential spaces?
Both.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's going to be a separate provision called adaptive reuse that would allow the conversion of what are currently non-residential buildings into residential buildings, and that would apply throughout the town, including downtown, but throughout the town. And what it would do in other areas of the town is allow for density bonuses, so that you can get more units in those old, perhaps motel structures or whatever the structure might have been used for. So yeah, both.
Okay.
So this lot here is, it's prime for new development, but throughout the rest of the downtown we mostly have developed lots, and so we would be talking about redevelopment of existing.
Would the idea be for this lot here to be for commercial development? I think that was the original idea.
Mixed.
Because so it could be
We would
housing.
hope that it would be mixed. That's
Right.
what the whole point of this
Okay.
is.
Perhaps residential units on the upper floors, and then retail perhaps below, or other commercial space below, maybe office spaces on the second floor, and then residential even on the third or fourth floor. So what we're looking at is the possibility of going up to 4 floors in the downtown and the town center district. And then that'll give you that opportunity to have that mix of space.
What could be going on? All right, well now we're here in the downtown district of Manchester with our 3 experts here to tell us a little bit about these zoning regulation changes that will be coming in place in all likelihood next year. So, Todd, tell us about what is permittable now here on Main Street in downtown Manchester, and what will be changing should those new regulations get enacted more or less as you've written them so far.
So when we first started this process, the downtown was one of the areas that we initially focused on. And one of the things that came out of the NED study is that we need significantly more residential opportunities in Manchester's downtown. And we want to create a walkable downtown community where people can both live and shop and go out to dinner at night. within walking distance of their home. So some of the major changes that are coming up is currently, from a density standpoint, we are allowed 4 residential units per acre in the downtown.
Okay.
That is going to change under the new ordinance and is going to be unrestricted. Instead of dictating it, it'll be driven by the amount of residential units that a developer can put on a piece of property within the setbacks and the height restrictions of the property. So the height restrictions are going to change, and we're going to be increasing that 5 feet to 40 feet total for new development, which will allow realistically 4 stories of development in the downtown. Currently, you can fit about 3 in. And then the other thing that we want to do is to continue the feel of Main Street into that more walkable downtown community, is instead of having a minimum setback like we do in a lot of other places in town, we're going to have a maximum setback of 15 feet, which is new properties are developed, like say, for example, Rite Aid were to get redeveloped, that building that would go on that site would have to be pulled closer up to the sidewalk or to the street line with parking behind the building to continue that downtown feel that we have currently.
Now, could someone, if someone wanted to redevelop a property, I'm looking across the street here at Heinol's Magic Sleigh. I mean, it sounded to me like you were saying they could add another story on top of those buildings. Would that be possible, or?
Yes, actually, we're encouraging more stories on top of the building. And in the case of the downtown, we're actually under the new ordinance, there will be a minimum of 2 functional stories that are required with each development project.
So really, it sounds like the clear thrust of all is to try to increase density in downtown areas, so more people are living downtown. Make it
Yes.
easier for that to happen.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's go on to our last destination now. We're going to be going up into one of the rural districts. It's a bit of a contrast from what we've been seeing so far, seeing how the regulations that have been proposed would affect those districts. So Janet, tell us, what would be changing, again, the same basic questions before, what would be changing in a rural residential district like this one from what's available at present?
So right now, this kind of area, this rural part of town, is zoned for 2-acre minimum lot sizes. So over the course of 40 years, the 40 years that Manchester has had zoning, it has been chopped up into 2-acre lots, and 2-acre, 10-acre, 5-acre here and there. But in order to preserve what is the basis of the Manchester economy, this kind of viewscape, and in order to continue to provide for working lands uses in this town, we have to decrease residential density in these rural parts. And so instead of having a 2-acre minimum lot size, what has been called the farming and rural residential district will be divided into a rural agricultural district and a rural residential district. And the rural residential district will kind of recognize those areas that have been subdivided into those smaller lots, and we will probably a 5-acre minimum lot size will be instituted there. And then in the rural agricultural areas, such as this area where you can see these large open fields and old barns, we'll have a 10-acre minimum lot size. Now, what that means is you can have 1 residence per 10 acres or 1 residence per 5 acres. But what we are also doing to sort of offset that change is allowing people to do what would be called planned residential development, in which they would preserve half, or in the rural ag, 70% of the original lot area, and thereby get density bonuses so that you could have small lots with houses on them. Right. The other thing that we're doing is currently, under the current ordinance, you cannot count wetlands, steep slopes, flood hazard areas toward your residential density if you are going to subdivide in the rural areas. Under the new ordinance, you will be able to count those acreages toward your density. So that's another way to get back what what is seemingly being taken away. So you wouldn't be able to build a house in the wetland, but you would be able to build it somewhere on the property. And you could configure this in lots as small as I think we said 10 times the building envelope or the building coverage. So there is no minimum lot size anymore, other than you have to have at least 10 times the size of the house, the footprint of the house, basically.
So the timeline for getting this all approved is going to be what exactly? In January, there's going to be another public hearing?
Well, so the Planning Commission has to hold a public hearing by statute, as does the Select Board. The Planning Commission is planning on having one more meeting in December and then warning the ordinance and the map for public hearing in January. And they're planning on extending that hearing over the course of probably two 2-hour meetings in January. And after getting the feedback that it does through those 2 hearings, the commission will then forward to the select board if it feels that the public's ready for this. And then the select board would hold a public hearing.
So there'll be multiple opportunities for the public to weigh in and make suggestions.
It would be best, however, if they gave their public input as soon as possible, because one of the things that happens is under state law, once the Planning Commission forwards that ordinance to the Select Board for hearing, any applications for a zoning permit that come in to my office will have to meet the stipulations of both ordinances, and that would be kind of nightmarish for everybody involved. And so, we don't want people to wait until the select board is about to consider it. We want people's input now, and we've gotten a lot of input throughout this 2-year process. But we need to continue to have it so that when it gets sent from these guys to the select board knows that there's public support for this, and they're pretty confident that it's what Manchester wants.
Okay, well,
And I think also affirmative support is just as appreciated as negative support. If things are working that people appreciate, that feedback would be good as well. Not just what people don't like, but what people do like as well. So we know we're on the right track.
Yeah.
all right. Well, it sounds like some major changes potentially in the works after a long time of study and discussion. And I want to thank all 3 of you for taking the time to be with us today to tell us a little bit about that. And all of you folks out there who may be watching, if you have a vested interest in this, mark the calendar for that Planning Commission meeting. So I want to thank Greg Beauchart, the chairman of the Planning Commission of Manchester, Janet Hurley, the planning director for Manchester, and Todd Nebraska, member of the Planning Commission. And thank all of you for being with us today.